Morning, everyone. You're in the Zendo and out there in the virtual Zendo. Hello, everyone. If you're in the Zendo, you have the choice of watching me in person or on TV. Since there's a large monitor in the front of the room, I just realized this morning you have a choice. So Dahui said that there are three essential requirements for Zen practice: great faith, great doubt, and great determination. And it seemed like if these are essential requirements, they would be a good thing to investigate this morning. So the first of these is great faith. Spent a bit of time wrestling with this one. Unlike most religions, I think we think of Zen, we think that Zen is not a faith-based religion. There are teachings, but there isn't a particular belief system that we're asked to subscribe to. And I think this is part of what actually attracted me to Zen. The Buddha encourages us to consider the teachings and see for ourselves. This goes back to some of the Buddha's earliest teachings. In the Kalama Sutra, there's a passage where the Kalama people explain to the Buddha that many teachers have come and gone and offered them many teachings, while also disparaging the teachings of others. And they don't know what to believe. And the Buddha responded, "Of course you are uncertain, Kalamas. Of course you are in doubt. When there are reasons for doubt, uncertainty is born. So in this case, Kalamas, don't go by reports, by legends, by traditions, by scripture, by logical conjecture, by inference, by analogies, by agreement through pondering views, by probability, or by the thought, this contemplative is our teacher. When you know for yourselves that these qualities are unskillful, these qualities are blameworthy, these qualities are criticized by the observant, these qualities, when adopted and carried out, lead to harm and suffering, then you should abandon them." So we can see from this that the Buddha was telling us to trust in our own experience, to really examine our own experience closely. He's saying, in essence, know for yourself what leads to suffering and what leads to joy and kindness. Know for yourself what is right and what is true. Try this practice and see for yourself, which is a little different from what we typically think of as religious faith. And around the time I started thinking about this, I heard a wonderful interview with an evangelical Christian congressman from Texas named James Tallarico. It was really one of the things that inspired this talk. And I'll let Tallarico speak. He said, one of the mind-blowing things that happened to me in my first year of seminary is that I was studying this word faith. In many translations, it's belief. The idea of believing in a concept or an idea, which makes sense in Western translations. But it can also be translated as trust, which is to me much more experiential. Trusting that love is going to get you through the hour, through the day, through your life. That love is going to carry all of us forward. That love will ultimately prevail even when it's temporarily defeated. To me, that's what my faith feels like. It feels like trust. Almost like when I learned how to swim at our neighborhood pool and my swim teacher told me, don't fight the water. Let the water carry you. So this actually gave me a little bit of a different perspective. We can think of it as belief, but actually the definition or translation of trust seems to be more in keeping with Zen practice. Actually, I think in Zen, for most of us, it's not initially great faith or great trust. It's probably more like provisional faith or provisional trust. We come to a Zendo. We start to sit zazen. Maybe our first experience with zazen wasn't very satisfying. We had expectations about what we should be feeling and they weren't met. But we experienced something. We got a glimpse of something. A something we felt we should trust. And then there are teachers, and we listen to the teachers. And the teachers tell us that zazen is useless. Don't try to attain anything. Don't judge your meditation practice, just sit. And they also say that zazen is the Dharma gate of ease and bliss, that we actualize Buddha when we sit. That when we sit, we can drop body and mind and experience our true nature. So many words. But something about the experience in the words makes sense. And we keep sitting, and we keep coming back. And we start to trust our experience on the cushion and our experience after we get up from the cushion. And we find a teacher we can trust. Before I joined the Village Zendo, I shopped around a bit. I tried a couple of different Zen centers. Things didn't feel quite right to me for one reason or another. Then one day I came to the Village Zendo. This was years ago when we were down on Barrack Street. Enkyo Roshi gave the talk that day, and the Sangha made me feel welcome. That was it. I said, this is the place. This is the real deal. So I felt that I could trust, a provisional trust to be sure, but still I felt that I could trust that Enkyo Roshi was a teacher of the authentic Dharma that I desperately wanted to hear. In time, I think our trust grows. Our trust in our practice, in our own experience, in our teachers. We begin to understand what the role of a teacher actually is. Our trust in the Dharma. Ultimately, we begin to trust that we actually are intrinsically Buddha. And that in fact, all beings are intrinsically Buddha, even though our Buddha nature has been obscured through years of conditioning and erroneous views. And we start to see for ourselves that we are not separate, that we are part of a vast and interconnected whole. And this trust eventually becomes something we might call great faith. Now, I had another thought when thinking about this. It's possible that we actually know this even before we start to practice. We know that we are intrinsically Buddha in our heart of hearts. And it might be the thing that brings us to the Zendo in the first place. Maybe we start to practice because we know that the Buddha way is coming home to our true self. I'm not sure, I don't know. I do know that our confidence in practice changes with time. It waxes and wanes. But on the whole, at least in my experience, our faith grows into a great faith, if you want to call it that. Faith in the precepts, faith in practice. Faith that not knowing is a good attitude to have towards my life, that this life is something we cannot really know. We have to embrace it and live it wholeheartedly. So that's a little bit on great faith. What about great doubt? Isn't doubt one of the 5 hindrances to practice? That was my first question. Sensual desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, restlessness and worry, and doubt. All right, so those are the 5 hindrances. And of course, I think our doubt arises alongside our faith. Maybe we'll call this our small doubt. We say to ourselves, it's not possible for me to be free. I'm too messed up, the world is too messed up. Is it really possible for me to be free? How can I have faith in the Buddha Dharma in this broken world? And before I started practice, I had spent years embracing my doubt, telling myself that my insecurity was valid, my anger was justified, My greed was an appropriate response in a greedy world. So when the beginnings of faith emerge, the doubt that we're carrying emerges too. But the great doubt that Dahui speaks of is not this great doubt, is not this doubt. I think the great doubt that Dahui speaks of is our questioning. It's our search. How should I live this life? What is this life? It's the deep question that set the Buddha off on his quest to end suffering. And as we begin to get more clarity on the nature of our own suffering, we ask ourselves, why do I suffer? Who is it that suffers? Why is there so much evil in this world? What is this great matter of birth and death that we've been studying this Ango period? Can we see birth as the undivided activity of all things? Can we see death as the undivided activity of all things? Can we actually allow our perspective to be this large? Is that possible? Can I do that? So the Zen path of great doubt is about these questions that can't be answered. Everywhere else in our life, we're taught to find the answers to questions. Everywhere else. In Zen, we're taught to ask questions that have no answers. It's also a path where we don't allow ourselves to push anything away. Not an easy path. So this is actually the power of koan study. In koan study, we train in asking questions that can't be answered. The monk Ikai, who was the author of the Mumonkan, worked for 6 years on the koan mu, given to him by his teacher. A monk asked Master Joshu, "Does a dog have Buddha nature?" Joshu answered, "Mu." And in his commentary on working with this koan, Ikai writes, "Don't you want to pass this barrier? Then concentrate yourself into this mu with your 360 bones and 84,000 pores, making your whole body one great inquiry. Day and night, work intently at it. Do not attempt nihilistic or dualistic interpretations. It's like having bolted a red-hot iron ball. You try to vomit it, but you can't." Great doubt. There are questions that have arisen in my life where I've had this great doubt. It's not just an idle practice of jumping through koans. It helps us understand how to live this life. So as I say, this is not an easy path. Certainly not at first. We have to sit with our faith and our doubt, however they manifest in us at that time, with our sensual desire and our restlessness and worry and our sloth and torpor. We have to sit with all of it. It's easy to have lackluster Zen, though, if we don't have any faith and push away our great doubt. It's the tension between great faith and great doubt that give rise to great determination. And our practice relies on determination. If we don't bring ourselves to the cushion and face whatever arises in our life, then what are we doing? Why even bother? We have to sit through our discomfort and our boredom and our little doubts. But make no mistake, bringing ourselves to the cushion takes effort. Bringing ourselves to atone for our flaws, to work with our karma and the karma of the world, takes effort and determination. Following the precepts, observing our vows, takes effort and determination. I think the classic Zen story about determination is the story of Bodhidharma's encounter with the second ancestor, Huike. And so I'll tell a little bit of this story. When Huike arrived at Shaolin Temple in China, he was actually already a middle-aged man. He was a devoted spiritual seeker. He had received the Buddhist precepts. And in the transmission of the lamp, it says he extensively studied the doctrines of the great and small vehicles. So quite a serious guy. And he appeared at the door to the monastery on the 9th day of the 12th month in the year 528. And Bodhidharma would not open the door. He wouldn't open the door. And it was snowing, and the snow continued to fall. 24 hours passed. The snow was up to Huike's waist. The cold, I think we can relate to this after the last few weeks, the cold penetrated his bones. He fortified himself by saying, "When the ancients sought the way, they pounded their bones and extracted the marrow. They drew blood to relieve their thirst. What kind of a man am I?" It's a legend. Legends have to be a little bit flamboyant. Eventually, Bodhidharma came to the door and said, "You've waited here a long time in the snow. What do you want?" And Huike said, "I beg you, priest, in your compassion, open the door of ambrosia and deliver us common beings everywhere." And Bodhidharma said, again, this is a legend, a little bit of poetic license perhaps, "The supreme wonderful way of the Buddhas takes eons of practicing diligently what is hard to practice and enduring what is hard to endure. How can you struggle in vain with your slight merits and deficient understanding, thoughtlessness, and pride?" Huike's determination grew even stronger. And as the legend goes, he at once picked up a sharp sword, cut off his left arm, handed it to Bodhidharma as a demonstration of his commitment. Now, whether Huike actually cut off his left arm or not is not known. But this story, like all story, carries its own truth. And Bodhidharma realized that the man in front of him was a great vessel of the Dharma, and he permitted him to enter the room. The Tangaryo ceremony that's coming up in a little while is actually a bit of a reflection of this sitting outside in the snow, to really prove our commitment to the Dharma, to prove that we have a serious intention of becoming students of Zen. And so when Bodhidharma led him into the room, he said, "Buddhas, when they first seek after the truth, give no heed to their bodies for the sake of the Dharma. You have now cut off your arm before me. I see the sincerity of your seeking." And Bodhidharma gave him the name Huike, which means potential for the Dharma. And there were a few other exchanges in there, but I'll move on a little bit. And at some point in Huike's study with Bodhidharma, he said, "Up until now, for many years, I have studied the Tao. I've studied the sutras and how to live, but my mind is still not at peace. I beg you, my teacher, please give it peace." And Bodhidharma's response was, "Bring your mind to me, and I will set it at rest." Bring your mind to me, and I will set it at rest. I think Bodhidharma's words pointed to the root of Huike's problems. He was a brilliant scholar. He had studied innumerable philosophical texts. His head was filled with ideas. But he had not yet touched that place beyond thought and ideas in his practice. Where is the mind that's not at rest? Who is it that's seeking it? Is the mind round or square? Does it exist or does it not? If it exists, bring it to me. Bodhidharma's questions like the old quote, he killed the enemy with the sword he took from the enemy himself. He pointed to the root of the problem. So we don't know how long after Bodhidharma's words Huike wrestled with this question. Perhaps he sat zazen for many days and nights. He may have experienced great despair, great doubt. And eventually he came before his teacher and said, Master, I have searched for the mind, and it is finally unattainable. And Bodhidharma said, there, I have thoroughly set it at rest for you. I've set it at rest for you. Now that you realize it's unattainable. Your mind is just what it is. So I've always read this story as being a story about determination. And of course it's also a story about doubt. But I realized it's also a story about great faith. His trust that the Dharma was worth his whole life. So, since I started with great faith, there was one other thing I wanted to mention about faith. And as I said at the beginning, we think of Buddhism in general as not being a faith-based religion. And Zen, as part of the many threads of Buddhism throughout the world, is often said to be dependent on self-power. We have to sit. We have to look at our lives. And we do. There's no way to shortcut that. But again, as I was working on this talk, I think it's important to note, and as I was actually exploring my own faith, I think it's important to note that there are other Buddhist sects that emphasize other power. So there's self-power, which is joriki in Japanese, and there's other power, which is tariki. And in these other sects, the idea that our liberation ultimately relies on forces much greater than our will alone. Though I've practiced myself self-power for many years, I also have to acknowledge the importance of other power. I don't know all of the causes and conditions that brought me to the Zendo in the first place, or that allowed me to develop this great faith. So I'll read you a little story that was written by Dazu McPhillamy, one of G.U. Kennett's Dharma successors. And he wrote, many years ago, G.U. Kennett Roshi went to study Zen in Japan and asked her teacher, the abbot of Sojiji, about the relationship between practices like Zen and more devotional practices like chanting the Nembutsu. And the teacher smiled. And he said that the process of Buddhist training is like walking through a long tunnel. But unlike a regular tunnel, where the goal is to get somewhere else, the important thing about this tunnel is what it does to you while you're walking through it. So it really doesn't matter which end you go in or which end you come out of. What matters is that you walk all the way through and come out a transformed person. And then he gave an end to each end of the tunnel. One he called Zen Buddhism, and the other he called Shin Buddhism, or Pure Land Buddhism, which is the other major form of Buddhism found in Japan. And it may be the most devotional type of Buddhism around. Shin Buddhists revere Amida Buddha and worshipfully recite his name. many times a day to refocus their devotional attention upon him. And Koho Zenji told Kenneth Roshi that it was fine to enter the tunnel through the end called Zen, with none of that religious stuff anywhere in sight. He just warned her not to be too surprised, however, if she came out the other end a devotional person. And that's what happened to her. So Shin Buddhists don't sit zazen for many periods in sesshin. If you go, I'm told, I haven't been to a Shin Buddhist temple, it looks a lot like an American church in the US. But they chant with deep faith and devotion. Namu Amida Butsu. Namu Amida Butsu. Over and over again. And having the faith to do that is something very special. So wherever you are on this continuum of tunnel, trust in your zazen, exactly where you are, without judgment or expectation. Trust in your own experience, in the validity of your experience as your guide and teacher. Trust in the Dharma, which is this continuous unfolding of the world of cause and effect, exactly as it is. Trust in the undivided activity of birth and death, which have no beginning and no end, the undivided activity of all things. So I'll end with a verse. A week or so ago, I think it was Taylor who asked a question on the IO list about one of my favorite Zen texts, the Sin Sin Ming, which starts, "The great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences." So I will end with one of the later verses in this beautiful teaching. One thing, all things, move among and intermingle without distinction. To live in this realization is to be without anxiety about non-perfection. To live in this faith is the road to non-duality, because the non-dual is one with the trusting mind.